So let me actually now introduce you to our first keynote speaker. I'm delighted to see that the running count on the number of people now engaged with us is hitting 2,100, which is fantastic. So all 2,100 of you, please do pay attention now, because we've got a fantastic opening keynote from Paul Stoltz. Let me just tell you a tiny bit about Paul. He is one of the world's leading authorities on integration and resilience in business. His business is all about understanding how to take on adversity. And goodness knows, one cannot think of a time where adversity was a more relevant challenge than right now. He, just to give him just a few of his accolades, has been announced as one of the top 10 most influential global thinkers in HR magazine. He's been intimately connected with MIT's wonderful entrepreneurship program. He writes, he thinks, he gives lectures. I'm delighted that Jonathan has persuaded him to give his thoughts to us right now. We are, ladies and gentlemen, in a time of maximum adversity, so we need the greatest minds to think about how to combat it. So I am delighted to say, Paul Stoltz, the floor here, the virtual floor, is now yours.
Stephen, let me speak to you. So who are some of the most exciting and dynamic industry leaders that you've interviewed over the years?
Goodness. Well, I've over the years interviewed quite a number of travel, tourism, hospitality leaders. The ones that stick in my mind, I guess, actually, I'm not sure if it was an event I did with you, but the leader of Marriott Hotels, and he's got the Marriott name, and I forgot who is the CEO. Yeah, yes, that's right. But the Marriott family, going back a little bit, I interviewed one of the Marriott family.
It would have been Bill Marriott, amazing individual.
Bill Marriott, exactly.
Yeah.
Love talking to him, because a man whose name carries the brand, who is a leader in hospitality, and pretty forthright too, because some CEOs, they approach people like me with a degree of caution. But what I love are CEOs who have the confidence in what they do to either come onto HARDtalk or take a stage with me, take the tough questions, and do it with a degree of confidence. And he was one of them, so he sticks in my mind. And I've interviewed leaders of the WTO in the past. Taleb, I think, who I've met at various events over the years. He's been someone who's given me great insights into your business, and thanks to conferences like yours. So I would not pretend, and I'm sure everybody listening and watching right now would not expect me to be steeped in your business, but I certainly know enough about it to understand that perhaps there is no industry that is more affected by what we are going through right now than hospitality, travel, and tourism. I mean, you guys are under the most enormous strain, and you have to think so very hard about how you're going to cope, but not just cope, but then move forward. And that's why I think today is so important. As I'm talking to Jonathan, I'm looking at Paul as well, who's back in his seat.
He's got his cables on, but I think he needs to disconnect his Bluetooth. I think that his earpods on his computer. But so Stephen, you interviewed Mohammed Alibar, the chairman CEO of Emaar Hospitality at our conference in Dubai. And we had the revolving stage at the time, which I remember you felt a bit dizzy on.
Yeah.
But he, again, is an extraordinary leader.
Yeah, and what's happening in the Middle East is amazing. There is no part of the world, I think, that has been more ambitious in pushing its hospitality vision than the Middle East. And actually, interestingly, I even took HARDtalk a little while ago to Saudi Arabia to look at what they're doing on the Red Sea, talk to officials about that. And I'm watching that whole space with great interest, because as a long-time Mideast reporter whose main concern is politics and geopolitics, geostrategy, it fascinates me the degree to which some of the more, let's face it, conservative and traditional societies in the region have such ambitious plans to turn themselves into hospitality and leisure growth points. And that's something that over the next few years I'm going to continue to watch very closely. And I know it's, in your business, that's something that you're very intimately involved with. It is a fascinating business vision that they have.
Do you think with the impact of COVID-19 that hospitality and tourism as an industry will be recognized more so because of the impact it's having on our industry?
Yeah, I think, it's made people in positions of political leadership and economic leadership across the world just appreciate how fundamentally important hospitality, travel, and tourism is to the world economy. You'll know better than me the figures, but what is it? It's getting on for 10% of global GDP is intimately wrapped up with this business. It's huge, and the numbers of jobs, and particularly in certain countries, hospitality is the dominant sector. So when it's knocked out, when we literally are living in a world where aviation travel is not possible, where for example, in London, the Foreign Office has just told all British citizens that non-essential travel to anywhere in the world simply should not happen indefinitely. That's an extraordinary thing that the Foreign Office just said. So in essence, the 60-something million people that live in the UK have been told, forget about holidays, forget about travel for leisure for as long as this takes. And it might take months, it might take many months. So if one multiplies that across the world to all the key markets, because nobody's immune from this, we are talking about one of the world's most important business sectors, which is in the deep freeze. And I think politicians, because of the fallout from that, the job losses, look at the degree to which the unemployment figures across the world have just soared, and so many of those unemployed people are in these sectors. We now understand just how important it is. And that, in a funny sort of way, although it's a profound negative for everybody watching us today and involved in your industry, it's a profound negative, but it also perhaps has a little bit of a silver lining, because it tells political leaders, it tells public figures of all sorts that your business is fundamentally important and needs to be prioritized once we start talking about recovery and moving forward.
Stephen, we're based in the UK. How do you think the UK is performing at the moment in terms of managing this crisis, in terms of leadership?
Yeah. Well, it's so very difficult, isn't it? You say to me in terms of leadership, well, our leader and our figurehead, and in a political system where the Prime Minister has extraordinary powers, we unfortunately are, without a leader. We see Boris Johnson, God help him, in intensive care in a London hospital. And of course, the government has fallbacks, and we have a deputy PM who is currently stepping up in the shape of Dominic Raab. But nobody can kid ourselves. This is a really big deal. It's a real problem for the United Kingdom that our leader is incapacitated thanks to COVID-19. And when one looks at the bigger picture of how we are responding, it raises so many questions which are relevant, far from the UK, right around the world. We've tried to find a balance. We were not quick in the UK to lock down. Some countries were much, much quicker than we were. We tried to strike a balance to keep freedom alive for as long as we could in terms of movement and ability to continue to operate economically. But now we're in a pretty strict lockdown. The debate in this country, like in so many others, is how long this can last before it does such profound damage to the economy that, to use the words that Donald Trump was using, and I very rarely do that, but, he did early on in this crisis talk about the danger of, in his words, the cure being worse than the disease. It's a very weird way of putting it, and one doesn't want to ever put value of a human life against economic data. But nonetheless, there is an unavoidable reality here that the longer this crisis goes on, the more damage it does to the economy, and the more damage that does to people's lives, whether in your sector or many others too. So I would say the British government perhaps hasn't been the most efficient if you compare it to some of the Asian governments in South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong. If you compare it to Germany, it hasn't got testing as well established, as systemized as they have in Germany. So we're not, I wouldn't say we're performing the best, but it is true to say that politicians are trying to step up. They are doing their very best. I think the public appreciate that. And, you know, we all as citizens have to wish our leaders well, because we, you know, to coin that other great political cliche of our time, we are all in this together.
Stephen, tell us a little bit about yourself, your personal situation at the moment. You're in self-isolation or in isolation in London. How are you coping?
Well, pretty well. My family, thank goodness, are all well. None of us have got any of the symptoms, so you know, that is the most important blessing of all. My kids are all young people who actually are being badly hit by this. You know, one of them is about to do a master's, doesn't know if that's going to happen. Another was just out of university working in hospitality, and that job, of course, has disappeared. Another was in teaching. Schools have been laid off, so he's not working. You know, so this is the reality for everybody. But, you know, they're young people who are pretty resilient and pretty cheerful, and they're hoping, like all of us, that this won't last too long. But it is difficult. And I think, you know, I'm in a relatively privileged position because, you know, I live in a relatively nice place, and you know, I'm lucky in that sense. But I'm so aware that for people who were economically challenged before this all began, and for whom life was tough before COVID-19, life is so much tougher now. And that is why I think, you know, this isn't all about just the immediate public health crisis. It's about so many long-term impacts, from a massive rise in unemployment to mental health issues, to the way we organize our societies. And I think, you know, as we hopefully, as today unfolds, we are going to be talking about so many different ways in which we have to measure the ramifications of COVID-19 and think very carefully about how we build better systems for the future.
Okay. Stephen, so we were supposed to have Paul, which is disappointing because he is considered one of the top 100 speakers in the world when it comes to grit and resilience. But, you know, not such a bad thing, because I wanted to, we'll be doing this conference again shortly. So we will definitely get Paul back to speak on grit and resilience, because we had planned for him to speak for 30 minutes. But perhaps we bring up Anita onto the stage. Anita, are you there?
I am here.
Great. So Anita, I think you're next on the program. Have you got your panel organized?
Indeed. And now we have Paul.
we have Paul back. Let's just see if Paul can now speak and we can hear it. Paul, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, fantastic. Paul. All right.
Laptops. I got to back up. I'm the adversity guy. Come on.
Hey, you're full of grit. Well done. Well, listen.
Paul, you know what? All good things have to be waited for, and believe me, I've been waiting for you. I've been filling time.
I've been listening to you. You've done a brilliant job.
Yeah. Really well, listen.
I'm going to say goodbye off you two. You might want to just tighten our timing here a little bit, because we're going to be running late now.
Of course.
Yeah. So Paul, I gave you the big intro. I won't do it again. Simply to say that in terms of global thinkers on building in resilience and facing adversity in business contexts, you are the man. And now I want you to prove it by giving us perhaps a slightly condensed version of your presentation.
I would be most delighted. Thank you. And it's just a delight to join everybody. Of course, being the adversity guy, it's only fair that we be given a little bit of adversity. I'm going to open by asking you the question that I asked in my TED Talk at The Hague just a few weeks ago, my last international flight before all this insanity began. And that is this. What if, as crazy as it sounds, what if we could literally harness the greatest adversity of our times to unleash a future more brilliant than our wildest imaginings. Now, I don't say that to be glib in the face of all the suffering and pain and everything else. But as Jonathan mentioned, it just so happens I'm that crazy guy who has spent my life's work, the 40 years of my life, trying to decode the human relationship with adversity. So why don't we start there? Let's start with adversity. And what is your personal relationship with adversity? Ask yourself that question. As a matter of fact, my first polling question, if you're able to kind of show that one just real quickly, is how many adversities do you face in a typical day? How many headaches, frustrations, issues, difficulties, setbacks, obstacles, just in a normal day, let alone now? Well, to fast forward, as a global research firm, we've been tracking these trends for decades, more than 30 years. And what we've seen is that number has been gradually going up. Now, of course, just like the COVID virus, it's been spiking worldwide. So here's the thing. When it comes to adversity, I would be showing you my PowerPoints, but you don't need those. Let's just have a conversation about this. Because let's talk about the single most important, most potent thing that you and we can do in this moment of truth. What the science and research says is arguably more important than any single other thing, and that is this. Is it really the event itself, or is it about our response? And what if we could just do one thing, which is to master our core response to this adversity? What does that look like, and what does that mean? Well, about 35 years ago, through the research I was doing across these different scientific disciplines, I had a big awakening, a big aha. And what I discovered was, your IQ doesn't predict that much, does it? It doesn't predict anything about health, happiness, about success, about longevity. It doesn't really predict much of anything. But this thing called your AQ, your adversity quotient, does. It turns out that just like your IQ, which each of us have, your AQ, imagine as a young child, you were roaming around the planet, and each of us as a child began to hardwire, quite literally, your own pattern of response to adversity without even knowing it. And that pattern of response is something that lives with you your whole life, quite consistently, at least until now. And what if, beyond that, you could actually measure, validly and reliably measure, how you respond to adversity, this thing called your adversity quotient or AQ? And more excitingly, what if we knew definitively that this was something you could permanently and measurably rewire and improve? What would be the implications of that right now? Well, let's get right to the heart of the matter. I could talk to you about all the different science, and I would love to do that, but given the brevity of our time, and of course, the fact that I want to be able to have this conversation with you, Stephen, is on behalf of everyone here. It comes down to your core, the 4 core dimensions of your AQ. So instead of showing you these, I'm going to describe these to you. And if you are taking any notes, if you hardwire nothing else as a sort of guidepost for all of your thinking going forward from this moment on, go to your core. This is it. The first core dimension, C, stands for control. And it is not about actually controlling the event. The question it asks is, to what extent do you perceive you can influence whatever happens next? And so we're going to talk about control. Ownership is about the step-up factor. And it asks the question, how likely are you to step up to do anything to make it better? Reach is about how far it reaches into and affects everything else. And endurance is about time. So let's turn this into a tool that as a business leader, I use every single day. As a human being, I use in every situation. that we use to coach leaders and teams and organizations across all sectors, including some of the biggest in your sector all over the world. And I call it the core questions. And you can evolve it into your core strategy. And I'll tell you what it is. The first question is, what are the facets? The control question is, what are the facets of the situation that we can potentially influence to at least increase the chances that we come out of this better and stronger? What are the facets of the situation that we can potentially influence, maybe the ones we haven't even thought of yet, that at least increase the chances that we come out of this even better? And my guess is, if you got the least bit creative about that, there are a lot of them that go beyond the standard pull-down menu that everyone else is looking at. Ownership. Where and how can we step up to gain the most immediate positive traction in this situation? You know, here in the United States, they have these small business loans to try to save small businesses from drowning. Well, as you can imagine, it's just like when they announce a canceled flight at the airport. Those who wait lose the seat, and those who respond better and faster win. As a matter of fact, that's one of the biggest factors about AQ, is if we're all facing the same adversity, isn't it fair to say that those who respond better and faster win? And is that true of just an enterprise? Isn't that true of an individual? So control and ownership. Here's the big one. It's reach, and it has two parts. It's like an hourglass, and it asks the question, where and how can we minimize the downside, contain the fallout? Some of you have been doing that right now, whether it's dealing with staff or costs or whatever the issues may be, your infrastructure, your facilities, all these kinds of things. What can we do to minimize the downside? But here's a key part about this kind of adversity. We can't damage control our way to greatness. We can't cost control our way to greatness. So the question that the upside asks is, what can we do to maximize the upside of this adversity? Now, that sounds like a pretty glib and sensitive question when there's so much pain and suffering, and we've in many ways just begun. But those who answer that question first gain the most ground. And then the final one around endurance is not about your personal endurance, but it's around the perceived duration. And while we're not going to control how long this virus lasts or how long these policies are in place, the question it asks is, what could we be doing now? What could we be doing now to help get through this adversity as quickly and completely and brilliantly as possible? Because all of our adversity falls on this adversity continuum. And if you can imagine it, like the different layers. How many people have you seen who are at the bottom who've been just trying to frankly avoid this adversity in one way or another? We can do it chemically, we can do it interpersonally, we can do it in so many different ways. Then all of a sudden, a lot of us got plummeted in the next level, which is survival. How do we just stay alive? Now, in this industry, your industry, how many of you are in survival mode and just trying to come out alive? Well, life so quickly will ask, okay, now what, right? The next level up is called coping. And coping is my least favorite level because it's like keeping your head above water, coping and dealing. And you may be it takes tremendous energy and effort to cope with adversity. At Harvard Business School, where I have taught, and MIT and Stanford and INSEAD and all these schools where I've had the privilege of teaching, they teach you a protocol that many of you have learned for managing adversity. I'll tell you something. We're not going to manage our way out of this, because at the top, why wouldn't we take the lessons we've learned from measuring 1 million AQs around the world? Why wouldn't we take those lessons and harness, which is what they do, they convert the adversity into fuel. A fuel, here's the key part, that gets you to a place you never would have arrived at without this adversity. So what I really want to say to you, and again, I hope this doesn't sound like some crazy Californian talking to you, but from real science and real evidence, I just want to say I'm excited for you. Because what if we could harness this adversity to have you create an experience for your guests, for your customers, that is more brilliant than it ever would have been otherwise? What if you could create out of this adversity by focusing on what you can control, how you can step up, minimizing the downside, maximizing the upside, and containing this adversity? What if you were to leverage this adversity to be the ones that people flock to first with an intensified loyalty? Because on the other side of this is a new reality. Are you going to just do what everyone else does and say, we're clean, we're safe, it's okay, you can come back? Or are you going to leverage this to create a new experience where it's actually safer, better, more relaxed, more enjoyable than it is maybe even to be in my own home, where you've turned it into something kind of sexy and cool that goes with your brand? I mean, if I walk into a Marriott and everyone has the red Marriott rubber gloves on and they've made it this cool thing where the whole experience is effortless and touchless and beautiful, and I'm relaxed because I know that you've got it dialed in so beautifully, and we're not just trying to protect germs, but we're trying to foster a togetherness in a new way, I think you would begin to get it. You have a chance right now to write your story. And really, my final thought for you is this. Over these decades, we have helped businesses all around the world to use a core strategy to harness their adversity. With 9/11, there were businesses that came out dramatically better because that adversity happened. This is your 9/11. This is your moment. This is your opportunity to be able to do that, where you come out the other side more brilliant, stronger, better than you ever otherwise would have been without this adversity happening. And I will agree with you, what you were saying, Stephen and Jonathan, which is now's the time. Now's the time to sit down and devise your core strategy for how you're going to not cope, not survive, not manage, but to harness this adversity. Because here's the test. The only way you know you've harnessed adversity is when you look back and say, thank goodness that happened in a weird way, because we would never be who we are. We would never be where we are if that adversity had not occurred. So what if we could harness this adversity to create a future more brilliant than we ever otherwise would? I believe we can. And I hope my brief comments with you today in this quick flyby adversity-rich moment have been of some benefit to you to help you do that. Stephen, I welcome what questions you have, and I'm sorry for my comments being so brief.
No, not at all. It's been a real pleasure listening to that, Paul. I cannot imagine a more relevant set of thoughts than the ones you've just presented. We don't have a lot of time, obviously, because we're squeezed a little bit. I'm just going to allow myself a couple of very practical questions, because we've now got well over 2,500 people with us, Paul, and I dare say many of them are thinking, well, you know what? Of course, Paul's right. You know, we have to step up. We have to consider how we prepare ourselves for what comes next, and we need to be adversity ready. And you developed this idea of AQ, Adversity Quotient, and you kind of suggested from the get-go of your presentation that it could be compared in a certain way to IQ. Now, we know we can measure IQ, and you can quantify it, and therefore, you know, people can seek out colleagues, staff. They can hire people whom they know have the satisfactory, relevant IQ. Can you do the same thing for AQ? I'm just wondering, when you look at your own teams, your own staff, can you find ways to sort of measure and quantify their adversity readiness?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, if you don't mind, I'd like to offer just sort of a gift to the group. And Jonathan, please forgive me if this causes you any adversity, but hopefully it's a good thing. There is an instrument, the sort of definitive way to measure AQ. It's called the AQ profile, and it's an online assessment. It takes about 6 to 8 minutes to measure a person's AQ, and you get full results, with full description scores and video coaching, everything. Jonathan, what I'd like to do with and for you, if you don't mind, is on behalf of Peak, my firm, me, I'd like to send you a link for everyone who's part of this to be able to measure their AQ free of charge and just get a baseline so that you can get inside this more deeply and more profoundly for yourselves, first of all. And then, if that's of any use to you, we'll be happy to help you beyond that. But that'll give you a baseline. And that's the way we measure AQ, whether it's at Harvard or an industry around the world.
And leading on from that, Paul, can you then train yourself and indeed your colleagues up to become so much better at responding to adversity?
Definitively, yes. I started out as the biggest skeptic on that, but after 33 years of doing this work at Peak, we know that every group, for example, we take through the AQ training improves on average 11 to 23%, which is quite dramatic. And as dramatic as the score difference is, and that it sticks over time, is the behavioral differences and what you feel inside yourself and what people see in you. Because AQ affects performance, productivity, innovation, energy, effort. It affects problem solving, which is extremely relevant. Obviously, resilience. It affects agility and adaptability. It even affects longevity and health. So it's a real epicenter element for humankind, which is why I'm so passionate about this work and this research. And for me, because I'm an obsessively practical nerd, measuring it's one thing, but the real joy in this is seeing it measurably strengthen in people all over the world so that we're better equipped to harness and tackle the adversities we face every day. I can't think of anything more profound and important than that right now.
How much does leadership matter in all of this, Paul?
I get asked to say a lot of words, but the words I don't have yet, Stephen, is I don't have the words to describe the full magnitude with which a leader's AQ emanates out and affects everything and everyone around them. It literally shapes their ecosphere around them in ways we can't even fully articulate. So the single most important thing everyone on this event can do, honestly, is to measure and focus on and begin to strengthen your own AQ, because your core pattern of response to adversity emanates out and affects everyone and everything around you.
Paul, it's fascinating stuff, and I really appreciate your sending the link. I hope people, and now we're well over 2,600 people on this conference.
Amazing.
I hope, it's fantastic, and I really hope they will seek out the link. Perhaps they'll do their own adversity quotient profiling, learn a little bit about themselves through that, think about what you've said about just how important these qualities are going to be in the period ahead of us. But thanks so much for joining in today, Paul. We really, really do appreciate it.
Oh, it's just an absolute pleasure. I'm so sorry to have the challenges or adversity on the front end we had with technology, but as we do, we have backup plans to backup plans, because those who respond better and faster win. And I hope that all of you take that back with you as a result of our time together today. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everyone.
Not at all. I think, Paul, you were the embodiment of coping with adversity. So we saw it in action, man, and thank you so much for doing it.
It's my pleasure. It'll make a great story. Thank you so much.
You know what? I've seen the chat. Some people are telling the story already, and they're thoroughly.
We didn't even change my pulse, but it did delay your event. So
Almost like planned it. But anyway, thank you very much indeed. Everybody, you can see on the screen that we're now ready for our next presentation. So I'm going to disappear in just a moment. It's just for me to give a very warm welcome back to you, Anita. We have heard from you already. I tell you what, your smile lights up this entire conference. So keep on smiling, and I'm going to hand over to you right now. So back to you.